Okay, guys, lesson 5-1. Luckily, chapter 5, in my opinion, is a pretty easy chapter to start with for the semester. So hopefully you guys agree. So this first lesson is just review of equations and graphing lines. So this is Algebra 1 material. So I'm hoping we get through it pretty easily. All right, so the first one just says graph this equation. So you have a couple of options here. One option would be let's put it in slope-intercept form, which is I think what most of you are more comfortable with. So I'll write that out. If we put it in that form, then we can start with the y-intercept and then do the slope. The other option is to find the x and the y intercepts, which is pretty easy if you remember how to do it. So I'll show you how to do that as well. I'll show you both ways. So the first one would be let's just solve for y. So I'm going to subtract x from both sides because it's a positive x. When I do that, I can't forget this negative sign. So negative 3y equals, and then this x needs to go in front. So negative x plus 6. That way it's in this format. Then I'm going to divide everything by negative 3. All right, so that's going to leave me with y equals, this would be positive, and that's a 1 over 3. There's technically a 1 right here, x. And then minus 6 divided by negative 3 would be a minus 2 or negative 2. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, so let me go ahead and graph that one and then I'll show you. So this one, I'm just going to give myself some axes here to go off of. So I would start at negative 2, that's my y-intercept, and then I would go up 1 over 3. Up 1 over 3, and I can do that as many times as I need to. I can also go down 1 and over 3 this way. And then there's my line. Okay, the other option would be to find the x and the y-intercepts. Obviously, I already know that the y-intercept is negative 2, but there's another way to find that. So here was my original equation. So one way I could find my intercepts is to think of each variable as 0, one at a time. So let's say x was 0. That means that's not really there. So if I divide by negative 3, y is negative 2. That's my y-intercept. The other option would be to put 0 in for y. 3 times 0 is 0, so really just x equals 6. So my x-intercept is at 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So then I could graph this point and then just connect those. So that's my other option. In example 2, they specifically want me to find those intercepts. So I'm going to do that first. So here's my equation, 3x plus 2y equals 12, and I'm going to write it down twice so that I can actually write out exactly what we're doing here. So first, let's say I put a 0 in right here. That means I've got 3 times 0 plus 2y equals 12, and I for sure do not expect you to show all of this work. You can literally just cover this up and find the answer, but I'm writing out so that you can see what I'm doing. 3 times 0 is 0, which means I have 2y equals 12 left, which means y equals 6 if I divide by 2. This one, if I put 0 in for y instead of x, so let's leave the 3x alone and let's put a 0 in right here, then this is 0, which is really nothing. So really I have 3x equals 12, which means x equals 4. So when I go to graph this one, the easiest way to do that is just to graph those two intercepts. So my y-intercept was 6. So on the y-axis, I'll go up to 6. Right there. And then my x-intercept was 4. So I go over here to 4. And that's the 2 points that I will connect. Okay, and this was part of my answer because they did ask me that. You don't have to write out y-intercept equals 6, but they would, if this was multiple choice, they would write it like this. Y-intercept is 6, x-intercept is 4, like that, instead of saying y equals and x equals. But I don't care either way. Okay, the last thing that they're wanting me to do is find slope given certain information. So on the first one, they're giving me 2 points. On the second one, they're giving me an equation. So finding slope given 2 points, I would use this formula. Slope equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So you may want to write that down in your notes so that you don't forget it if you don't have it memorized. So basically that means I'm going to subtract my y's on top. So my y's are a 0 and a 2. And then I'm going to subtract my x's on bottom, which are a 4 and a 0. As long as I do it in the same order on top and on bottom, it's fine. So what I mean by that is if I put 2 minus 0, then on the bottom I need to put 0 minus 2 because I started with this point right here on the top. That means I got to start with that one for the bottom. So just make sure that you're consistent there. Otherwise, your sign will be wrong. You'll get the right answer, but the wrong sign. It'll be positive or negative. All right, so this one ends up 2 minus 0 is 2. 0 minus 4 is negative 4, which means I end up with a negative 1/2 as my slope. This one, the easiest way to do it would be to do what we did up here, and that was put it into slope-intercept form because this right here is the slope. So if I can get it in this form and then I just tell them that number, then I'm good. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to solve for y. So I'm going to subtract 2x first. That gives me negative y equals negative 2x plus 8. Then technically there's a negative 1 right here. So I need to divide by negative 1. So that gives me y equals positive 2x minus 8. So my slope in this case is 2. Please make sure that you give me that. I don't want this whole equation if they asked for the slope, right? So just make sure you tell me that that 2 is what the slope is. Okay, example 4 is asking me to find the equation of a line that goes through these 2 points. So now I need to think a little more deeply because if I have to write an equation of a line, most of the time this is what I'm looking for. So that means I need 2 pieces of information. I need the slope and I need the y-intercept, and there's easy ways to find that. So I'm going to start out with slope. Slope we already know how to find. We're going to do that y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I'm going to do my y's on top, x's on bottom. So my y's on top, I'm going to do 0 minus 2. My x's on bottom are going to be negative 1 minus 3. I could have done the opposite. I could have said 2 minus 0 over 3 minus negative 1, and I would get the same answer because the signs would end up canceling differently. All right, so this gives me negative 2 over negative 4, which ends up a positive 1/2 as my slope. Okay, so now the information that I have right now is 2 points and a slope. So what I'm going to use is point slope form. So this is another form of equation. You could do another form also. I'm going to stick with this one for right now, but you could go back and use this one again. I'll show you how to do that in a second though, because I feel like some of you may prefer that. If you use this form, you just take one of your points. It doesn't matter which one. I'm going to use this one because it has a 0 in it, and zeros are really easy to deal with. So I'm given an x and a y right here. I'm also given my slope because I just found it. So I'm going to plug those in for my x1 and my y1. So this would be y minus 0 equals, my slope is 1/2, and then x minus negative 1 is what this one was. So that really means plus 1. And then I'm just going to solve this out a little bit to make it a little simpler. So y minus 0 is really just y. This would be 1/2 x plus 1/2 if I distribute. So this is my equation in slope-intercept form. Sometimes they want it in standard form, so I am going to show you that. Standard form has no fractions in it, so I would go through and multiply everything by 2. So 2y equals x, or 1x, plus 1. That's what happens if I take everything in here times 2. Then x and y are on the same side. So I would minus x from both sides. So negative x plus 2y equals 1. And then the other thing that they tell you usually in standard form or general form is that there's no negatives up front. There's no leading negatives. So that would make this a positive x, and then this a minus 2y, and then that a negative 1. So this would be the general form. This is slope-intercept. And this right here was point-slope. So you may want to write those 3 forms down also so that you remember. So general form is ax plus by equals c. Slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, and then point-slope form is this, y minus y1 stuff. Okay, the other option on this one, once I had my slope, I could have went back to this slope-intercept form and say this. So let me write it out. I could say here's my y and my x. So 0 equals my slope was 1/2 times x was -1 plus b. And then solve that out. So 0 equals -1/2 plus b. Add a half to each side, so 1/2 equals b. Then I could have written it like this. So I knew my slope was 1/2, I knew my y-intercept was 1/2, but then I would still need to go into general form if they asked me to. So make sure you can get from this to this if they ask. If they don't ask you to put it in general form, you can leave your answer like that, okay? All right, example 5, this one specifically says find the general equation. So I know that I have to make it look like this, of the line which is parallel to this line. So one thing I want to remind you of is that parallel means they have the same slope. Parallel means they have the same slope. So be careful with that. And then this is my line. So what I'm going to do is say I need the slope from this, because if my line has the same slope as this one, I need to get the slope of this one. So I'm going to solve this out. So minus 4x, -2y equals -4x plus 3. And then I'm going to divide everything by -2. And I really do not care about this. Don't care at all. All I care about is what is the slope, because I know mine has the same slope. So that means y equals, this would be 2x minus, I'm just going to leave that 3/2 because I really don't care. All I care about is that my slope is 2. And then they told me that I have an x-intercept of 1/2, which is kind of weird. But if my x-intercept is 1/2, so let's think back to those graphs we were doing earlier. Go back over to it. Okay, so if I have an x-intercept, that point is whatever that x value is. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, comma 0, because we didn't come up off of the x-axis at all. So we didn't go up or down on the y-axis. So y was 0. So same thing on this one. This one was 6, comma 0. So in this case, my x-intercept being 1/2 tells me that I have the point 1/2, comma 0. So I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did up on that last problem. So I'm going to use point-slope form again just because I'm kind of partial to that. If you want to use slope-intercept form, that's okay. Go back up and watch this example over here. That'll show you the same thing. But this one, I've got y minus my y value was 0 equals my slope is 2, and then x minus 1/2 is my x value. So then I'm going to solve this out. Y equals, this would be 2x minus 2 times 1/2 is 1. But then again, they told me that they wanted it in general form. So I need to minus 2x from both sides to get my x's on the same side. So remember, if it's going to be in this form, ax plus by equals c, that means x has to be over there. So -2x plus y equals -1. And then, like I said earlier, so typically they don't like having a negative for my leading coefficient. Sometimes that depends on the textbook. So sometimes this may be here, this negative. Sometimes they may say, you know what, I don't like that there. So they would write it like this instead. Either way is okay with me. I'm telling you to pay attention to that because one, with answers in the back of the book, they may be different based on that. The other situation is if you have a multiple choice problem. Sometimes they'll give you this answer, but not this one. So just be aware that that's the same equation. Okay, the last thing I will mention is that sometimes you'll have a zero slope, sometimes you'll have an undefined slope. In those cases, the equation for that line looks a little weird, right? There's not an x and a y, it's just one-dimensional. So in this case, it's crossing the y-axis at 1, which means the equation for this line is y equals 1. Same thing with this one. This one is crossing the x-axis, which I'm calling 1. So that means my equation would be x equals 1, and that has an undefined slope. Okay,